Astrology is the myths of the stars and planets, telling the themes and plots of our lives. These stories come to us daily through our satellite, the Moon. She is constantly spinning astro news. Hi, I'm Merrylin Leblanc with Moonwise. Today's topic, the planet Saturn. Next Saturday, 2 days after the spring equinox, Saturn moves into the sign of Aquarius after spending 2 straight years in Capricorn, and it will return to Capricorn on July 1st for 5.5 months, and on December 16th, go into Aquarius again for a solid 2 years. Joining me today to discuss this energetic shift of the planet Saturn is astrologer and frequent guest of Moonwise, Daniel Fiverson. Welcome back to the Moonwise, Daniel.
Thank you, Merrylin.
So Saturn, let's get into Saturn. What's Saturn all about?
Well, Saturn is really a complicated planet and archetype, and probably the one that's the most misunderstood and maligned and feared. And, the truth is that we have nothing to fear from Saturn. But let's start at the top and look at, what the archetype, is from the beginning. It's a Saturn and Capricorn. I do use the 12-letter alphabet, to describe planet signs and houses. Saturn and Capricorn are both a feminine energy, and that's something we don't think of Saturn as feminine because he's one of the great patriarchs. He was the father, but yet the energy itself, as creative and generative as it is an inward directed energy where what's being created is on the inside of us that, yes, does show up on the outside. Saturn is shape and form and structure, and what he really is the shape and form of our consciousness. He is the container that holds the consciousness intact, if you would. A Kabbalah correlates him to Binah, to the Divine Mother, to the great receptor, to the actual vessel that holds spirit in the earth.
Well, your description of Saturn in that regard makes me think of a subject matter that we astrologers equate to Saturn, and of course to some other planets and points in a chart as well, and that is karma. Because I see Saturn as bringing up those things that are within us that we've come here to set right.
Exactly. Yes.
To achieve a certain level of right living, dharma, as versus karma. In that respect, so
he teaches mastery and skills, and the reason we find it so difficult is that he's teaching us the skills that we have probably resisted learning. And karma is a good word. Karma is nothing more than unfinished business, and so he will continually put in our face what it is that we need to learn in order to become who our soul has intended us to be.
Right. 40. All right. So, from that, too, that we also get some key words that are associated with Saturn, that Saturn has a lot to do with what we're able to achieve or accomplish here on the planet. And I know I've often said to people, without Saturn, because a lot of people go, oh, gosh, because Saturn does bring some hard lessons to all of us, I believe.
Right.
Is that we are able, though, with this energy to be able to manifest. And you mentioned that inward creative energy that is with the feminine. The feminine is that which accommodates anything and everything and brings life or birth to just about everything.
It has space for everything, right?
Space for everything, right, exactly.
It's like the TARDIS.
And Saturn is the planet that if we have something we really want to manifest or create, and I'm not necessarily talking about artistry when I say this, the person who is the painter or the writer or the whatever. I'm talking about, if you want to manifest a new home and you're not going to build it, or if you want to manifest a new job and you're not going to be self-employed, you have to work with Saturn.
Right.
It's that energy that allows us the wherewithal to bring about what we want here on this plane, on this earth plane. And sometimes that's an easy thing to do, and sometimes it isn't. And when it isn't, one needs to really look at one's life from a karmic perspective. You know, what dues do I have to pay?
Mm-hmm.
What forgiveness do I have to give? You know, what do I need to make right?
I think what you're describing is the difficulty with Saturn is he does, because he structures everything. We go up against those structures. We kind of hit a barrier. But what it really happens, we talk about aging and maturity. What maturity does, and what the crises and the lessons that we encounter as we grow, they push us back in upon ourselves. They push us back upon our own resources. Saturn and Capricorn is Earth. It's the basic, just like the resources in the earth, that we learn to mine the resources that we have within us. And if there's something that we find that we don't have, we learn that skill, or we learn how to generate that missing piece, that missing skill, that asset or essential need that we have.
All right. Well, this week we have Saturn in Capricorn for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the 21st, it's going to go into Aquarius.
Right.
It's not going to stay there. It's going to go back into Capricorn. So let's talk a little bit about the differences. Saturn is said to be the ruler of both of those signs. And yet they're different. They're very different. Adjacent signs are very different from each other. And yet when I think about Capricorn and I think about Aquarius, for adjacent signs, they do have a similarity.
Which is?
They both have to do with organizational skills or structure in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're society. They're both society.
With Capricorn, the structure is more about, in many cases, more about maintenance. How can we maintain this structure?
Mm-hmm.
We have, for example, a country, the United States of America, that you and I believe are both citizens of. And we're living in times when we're seeing the Constitution not being upheld as strongly as some of us would like to see it be upheld.
Right.
And so there is this kind of concern. And, of course, we're in election season, and many people are concerned about the state of the country, whether it will be the country we grew up in and, got to know as young people. And now you and I are in those middle to late years. And whether or not, some things are changing in the country that will change it fundamentally. I think Saturn and Capricorn is that urge to maintain fundamentally a structure of what it is, and I'm not talking necessarily about a building, a material building.
Well, it's the security of the society that we belong to. I think Uranus is more, and Aquarius are more community. The word would be, but Saturn, it's the ethics and the standards and the morals and the things that we've agreed to live together. It really is consensus reality.
So it has to do with something in the past.
Well, it is the past. It's Cancer and Capricorn. It's the whole polarity. So we have the need for sanctuary, in Cancer, the need for safety, but it's also expressed out into Capricorn as well. And that's really what Capricorn is doing, is trying to build out that Cancerian need for safety.
Right. And I mentioned karma, which is definitely something from the past as well.
Right.
When it goes into Aquarius, though, something different happens.
Well,
it's like we look at, I'm thinking of the first degree now of Aquarius. It's an old an Adobe mission in ruins. Okay, so it's like Saturn can say, well, wait a minute, what we had in the past needs repair. And so the question is, in Aquarius, do we repair it? Do we bring it back to what it was? Or do we answer what might be the planet Uranus's response, which is the other ruler of Aquarius? Or do we take it somewhere else?
It's interesting you say, do we bring it back? Because the way that my perspective on Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius, Aquarius is about wanting things to change. And, we assume that change means progressive change. The Saturnian component of Aquarius is that, yes, we want things to change, but we want things to go back to the way they used to be. And that's again, I think that's kind of the tug of war that we're seeing in the world right now, because the Iranian energy has been very active for a number of years now, and so has Saturn's been the actual underpinnings of everything that's been going on since 2008. And now, as Saturn shifts into Aquarius, it's going to shift that whole Capricorn structure it was still holding on to Pluto and Jupiter. So the outer planets are the effect of the outer planets is also going to begin to morph as Saturn progresses through Aquarius. It's going to bring all that energy in, but we're going to see a conflict, a crisis that's going to be created between those who want to see total change, total perhaps revolution, if not, evolution, if not revolution, and those who really want to regather and recoup what they think has been lost. And we're also seeing it to a great degree in what's happening in the Democratic Party right now, because there's this whole feeling people are I've been saying this for months, that they really want us to accept the middle of the roader, because at least it's better than what we have. And I am progressive.
And it's familiar to what we have.
It's familiar, right? And I admit, to being progressive, I'm out there on the far left, I'm sure. And, what we have is not working. It just is not working, and it maybe hasn't worked for 250 years. We're having problems with the Constitution because maybe the framers of the Constitution were too interested in protecting property rights and not really too interested in protecting human rights. And this is what we're facing. Aquarius is about human rights. Capricorn's about property rights. And we're seeing this dichotomy of values and priorities now that's a real clash, because it's not about property rights anymore. It's about human rights, and these are the issues and the ills of the world that we're dealing with.
I had to think for a minute there. I was thinking about people who have Capricorn suns, and then those of us who have Aquarius suns, like myself, and it's not, and it isn't as simple. The Capricorns would always want to be more about the property, but I mean, there can be other values,
of course,
a sustaining of a kind of a structure.
There's no single bottom line,
or whatever. But this dilemma between the two that we find in Aquarius is something I can personally speak of, being an Aquarius sun with Venus and Mercury in that sign as well, that it is always a choice, a struggle of something very different, or something that we've had that was ideal, that those two planets vie very strongly, I think, for people with a lot of Aquarius energy. You're listening to Moonwise here on KSFR 101.1 FM or streaming on the web at ksfr.org, where you can always listen to podcasts of this show and other shows that KSFR produces. And my guest today is Merrylin. My guest today is myself, Merrylin Leblanc. No, it isn't. It's Daniel Fiverson, a frequent guest here on KSFR. It's time for the Moon Minute. Daniel and I will return shortly, so stay with us. Welcome back to Moonwise. I'm Merrylin Leblanc, and today Daniel Fiverson, my guest, and I are talking about the planet Saturn moving into the sign of Aquarius next week on March 21st. 2 days after the spring equinox, which is March 19th this year. And we've talked about the planet Saturn at the beginning of the show, if you're just tuning in, and the fact that Saturn is said to be the ruler of both the sign of Capricorn and the sign of Aquarius, where it will be heading. And before we went to the break, Daniel, we were just talking about some of those differences about how Saturn is a little more clearly defined in Capricorn, but within Aquarius, there's this back and forth between, we'd like to maintain the status quo that we thought was ideal 10 or 20 years ago, and or we'd like to actually make some radical change, which is more a Uranian energetic than it is. And I think, we mentioned the challenge of these times within politics with this very issue. And I think the fact that Saturn is what is applying into a relationship we call a square with the planet Uranus. It's not quite exact yet, but that energy is there, and that is extremely challenging. It's a last quarter square, and it really does call for a change, as Rudyard used to say about it, a change in consciousness in the way that we perceive it. And I think using what you brought up about how some people really would like to just go back to, what it was like. I think you'd have to go back to the 70s at least, to an ideal time of the way that the government, the structure, the organization that we call America to be, would be satisfactory for some people. But what people need to realize is all of the components of the structure that are there, and who benefited and who didn't benefit from it. That this is a change in consciousness,
right.
To realize, like if we went back to just 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we would still end up in the same place we're in today,
right,
because of some of the
right,
policies being used.
Let's look at some real life examples here.
Okay.
All right, through history. I think one of the most telling ones was the ingress when Saturn entered Aquarius back in the early 1960s, in 1962, because there was the presidency changed from the Eisenhower years to the Kennedy years. And that was huge. I think Eisenhower was very much a Capricorn figure. He was the general. He was an authority. He was powerful, but it was power that was exercised consciously. We then had John Kennedy, and certainly all of the events of the 1960s. We had the Beatles. We had all the issues in the South, integration, and Martin Luther King. All of this occurred, through the early 60s, through that early transit, and it ended, unfortunately, with the assassination of John Kennedy and the Warren Commission, and so. We saw not just a progressive idea or a progressive, dimension, beginning to emerge, but we also saw perhaps the repression of it, because Capricorn is also known for repression and suppression. So it can work both ways. But we're dealing with cycles, and it's like the moon. You are the moon maven. We have cycles of animation and cycles of withdrawal. And so I think we see the same thing, historically as the events unfold. From my perspective, the relationship between Saturn and Uranus, to begin with, is a Capricorn Aquarius 10th house, 11th house relationship. Again, that Saturn Capricorn 10th house is our consensus reality, and that Uranus 11th house Aquarius is the shattering, if you would, of that crystallized consensus, where this is where revolution occurs. This is where we, things get broken down through trauma and interruption and disruption in order to so that something else can be born in their place. So the square from Saturn to Uranus is clearly going, again, from my perspective, is going to generate those interruptions, those disruptions to the status quo, to the consensus thinking, to the things that we take for granted and we believe to be true that really may not be. And, just to throw another coal in the fire, also, in May, certainly just weeks after the Saturn ingress, we're going to have the lunar nodes in Gemini and Sagittarius. So we're going to have this whole, this individuating truth. Pisces is still in Neptune. Jupiter is going to enter Aquarius and conjoin Saturn. It's going to be about truth, about what's real, about what's really going on. We're going to be, the masks are going to be stripped away.
There's going to be definitely a more realistic view of things. And I know with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we see coming up at the end of this year in December, it's at the very beginning of Aquarius.
0 degrees.
0 degrees. And I mentioned in the first half of the show the symbol for that degree of Aquarius is the Adobe mission in ruins. And what it says is that we are going to be starting a cycle that has to do with with an expansion of, or a putting forth and providing for, or promotion of a certain kind of structure. And if it's just to be practical, if we continue with the same president we have now, the structure is no longer one of democracy in the United States of America. It's
we're already there.
Some people claim that we're already an
there.
oligarchy, but definitely that will no longer be. It will become out of the deep state into the present everyday awareness.
Right.
Whereas if it is a status quo, we're still going to be tackling some of the old issues that have to do with the economy in this country.
More than the economy, yeah.
And if it's a progressive view, a more socialistic view, then we're in for some major change. And so, if you use the symbol of the Adobe, you could say that in any event, it would be the status quo where the Adobe mission would still be in ruins. But in any event, other than that, there is something new that will appear, and what you want that to look like is really at stake with this energy that we're facing.
The Adobe, the Sabian symbol for the Adobe says to me, Adobe is a very healthy, energetically clear way to build. It's built from the earth. It's built natural materials. It's non-toxic. It needs a lot of maintenance, but it represents something that is earthbound and earth centered and healthy and holistic. And yes, it has deteriorated, but we have lost that essential way to live that Adobe represented. So it doesn't mean getting rid of Adobe and all of a sudden using styrofoam insulation on everything. It means returning to the values and the technologies that we have had for millennium that are viable, and learn to update them in some way that they are also can be sustained and maintained in our world.
Okay, that may be the progressive or Uranian view.
Right.
Whereas the synthetic materials that you first described,
Right.
maybe the present state of things continuing as they are,
Right.
as they seem to be headed in a certain direction.
Right. Right.
You know, like the denial of climate change,
Right.
and the continued use of fossil fuels and other synthetic things whatsoever. So we only have a minute or two left here, Daniel. Are there some last words you want to say on this?
No, I think that we'll probably have more to say about this as the year progresses. We're still just at the beginning of the year. I just want to point out to everybody that I have been writing weekly forecasts, and
how can we read them?
And they're available freely. You can sign up on my website, the number 4 evolutionaryastrology.com. They're also on Facebook, on my Facebook page, Facebook/Evolutionary Astrology. Or Daniel at forevolutionaryastrology.com. Drop me a line. I'll add you to the mailing list. They're full forecasts, daily transits, and indications for each sign, and I'm getting really good feedback on them, guys. I'm amazed that they're really coming out as accurate as they are. So I invite you to join me.
All right. Well, thank you, Daniel Fiverson, once again for being my guest here on Moonwise. All of you out there, have a great week, and we'll be back next Saturday with more on Moonwise. Coming up next is Climate One. This is KSFR White Rock Santa Fe Public Radio.